Hi everyone. Today I have the pleasure to interview Agnes Callard, and she is a philosopher and a professor at the University of Chicago, specializing in ancient philosophy and ethics. And she's also the author of several influential books, including Aspiration, On Anger, and her latest work, Open Socrates. And that's why we are having this conversation today, because I have plenty of questions that I want to ask her about her last book. She's also an advocate for the idea that philosophy should be a way of life, not just an intellectual exercise. And I will ask her about this in a few seconds or a few short minutes. She's also very active in public philosophy, writes in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Boston Review, and also she regularly participates in public debates and podcasts. So very active. And I have to say that she's known also for her radical honesty, because she strives to live consistently with the philosophical principles she defends, even when it means sometimes challenging social and personal norms. Agnes, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. I would like to start the conversation by getting to know you a little better, who you are and what took you here. And I like to ask the question to all the guests of the podcast. What are three important things for yourself about your life, right? That's to describe you a little bit, who you are, what is relevant, what is important for you. And I know it's a tough question to begin with, right? But what are three things that are important for you in life?
I guess the first thing is my goal in life is to come to know the answers to certain fundamental questions that I have. It's a large set of questions and the questions change over time, but the goal is to have knowledge. And the second thing is that I'm not able to pursue this goal without the help of other people. That is, it's a cooperative project. Um, and um, what's the third thing? I guess the third thing will be that I, in some way, take my bearings and my inspiration from the ancient world.
So yes, three important things, very intellectual things, I have to say, looking at them from the outside, right? You don't talk about sports or about going outdoors, it's more intellectual work, so you're very much into it. And maybe also to connect more with you as a person who has a journey in life. I know, and you mentioned before we started this conversation, that you are Hungarian. You were born in Budapest, I understand, right?
Yes.
What took your family? I think you were quite young when you moved to the States. What happened there? What did you begin this journey with your family?
My parents were fleeing the anti-Semitism in Hungary, even in the early 1980s. When they left, it was still bad. You still had to be secretive. So my grandmother had a synagogue, like a secret synagogue, in her house. That's where my parents lived. But also the kind of strictures of communism and the ways in which my mother, for instance, who was the top medical student in the medical school, even she struggled to get a job, and even that was only through like the connections from her father. And both my parents were kind of disgusted by this aspect of the communist system, this kind of nepotism and lack of meritocracy. So I think the anti-Semitism and the lack of meritocracy. And I think another part of it was the way things worked in Budapest at the time. A couple like my parents would live with the family, so they lived with my father's parents, and there was no way out of that, I think, for my mother except to leave the country. So I think that was a part of it too. She wanted out. She wanted sort of her own household, which was not going to be achieved in Budapest.
I see. And how did that change for them or for you as a family when you moved to the States? I guess clearly for the good, right? That's why you've been here all these years. But yeah, I have to ask, what was the change the main change that your family experienced there?
So they went first to Vienna. That's how you left, because at the time, even though it was communism, you could always go to Vienna, because like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they still saw it as like, of course, we have to let people go to
Yeah.
Vienna. And then from Vienna, they went to Rome, and then they lived in Rome for, I don't know, 6 months to a year, some amount of time like that, in a kind of like hotel with a bunch of Russian Jews, old Jews who were trying to escape communism. But my family was the only Hungarians, and the others were Russian.
Mm.
Um, and at the time, I think my parents were thinking about going to Israel, but it was easier to get to the United States. So they ended up in the United States. Uh,
Mm.
I think it was pretty hard for them at first. My mother had to
Mm.
redo a lot of medical training because they didn't accept what she had done in Hungary. And neither of my parents knew English very well. So they had to learn it quickly. And they were, didn't have much money and didn't have any family to help out and didn't know anybody. So it wasn't, for them, it wasn't easy. For me, I don't remember it badly. I went to a religious school when we were, moved to America. I went to like a very religious Jewish school. Like half the day was in Hebrew, so I had to learn English and Hebrew like at the same time, because half the day was Hebrew, half in English. And there was some tension because my family is not really religious. They sent me to the school because the school would, like, we were like a charity case. So because my family was like Holocaust survivor, and we're fleeing communism, these really religious private schools, otherwise filled with rich people, were welcoming us there. But because we were not religious, for instance, our house, we didn't keep kosher, so other kids wouldn't come to our house because they couldn't eat anything in our house. So it was like there was a bit of a culture clash. I wore these like Hungarian embroidered blouses, and that was very weird to the kids, New Yorkers, on the Upper East Side that went to the school. So we dressed different. So there was there was a bit of culture shock, but I think it was much more culture shock for my parents than for me and my sister.
Yeah, I can imagine. And how would you say that this upbringing or these initial years of your life maybe shape you or affected the way you are today, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a question for my biographer, but I think I can guess. Here's the thing I would say is that I went to, I went to this school that was very religious. And like half the day, it was all talking about God and everything. And my mother, she was very worried that they were going to make me bigoted. Like she did not believe in God. She didn't believe. So I would come home. My mother would say, "They're lying to you. In the school, they're lying to you. They made up all this stuff about God. It's all fake. It's all lies. You don't have to eat. All these rules are nonsense." And so from a very young age, I kind of grew up with the thought that, well, there are these different worlds of people who have different ideas. And none of them have any explanation for why they think what they think, but they think it very passionately. So my mother never gave me an explanation or justification for how there is no God and all these rules are made up. But the school also never gave me an explanation or justification. And so I think, I might postulate that like from a young age, I was kind of had the thought, well, there's some stuff I'm going to have to figure out for myself because the explanations are not being offered.
Oh, that's very nice because part of why I was asking you about your personal journey is to understand or get a grasp of why you got into philosophy, and I think that's you're already pointing a little bit in that direction. No? Maybe
It's
the
true.
understanding God exists or not, and different opinions from the school and your parents, your mother. Would you say that that had an important influence, let's say, in your interest in philosophy, or maybe it comes from somewhere else?
At least I think I was exposed at a young age to the thought there are some very, very different ways of looking at the world. And even just from moving, from leaving Hungary and going to Rome and then going to the United States, like I was in these different worlds. And I remember when we were, this is a story, I probably don't remember it. This is probably a story my mother told me. But anyway, I have probably a fabricated memory. We were on the subway in New York City. You know, I'm like 6 or 7 years old. And um, I'm staring at Black people because I never saw Black people in my whole life. And they're on the subway. And my mother is really embarrassed. And she keeps telling me in Hungarian, stop looking, stop looking. And I said, how did they get so suntan? You know, like I thought they just spent so much time in the sun to make their skin get so dark. And but then this feeling of like I'm doing something wrong in looking at them. Uh, that's one of my memories from being very young is like that was somehow wrong to stare at them, but I didn't understand why, and I didn't understand how these dark people showed up. So that's you know, my guess is there were a lot of moments like that in my childhood where I was suddenly thrown into a new world with different rules that didn't make that much sense, and so I had that experience kind of over and over.
Hmm. Hmm. And would you say that you had clarity since you were young that you wanted then to study or to go deep into philosophy, or that was maybe a last minute decision when you had to decide which studies to undertake?
Neither. So when I was in high school, in the United States, we don't have philosophy in high schools. I had not heard of philosophy, but I was a debater. We have high school debate. Debate is like it's arguing, right? And it's like fighting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a judge, and then you are one side and someone else on the other side. The judge judges who did a better job arguing. I would love this. I was really passionately involved in it, but I was not good at it. I didn't win. I kept losing, and I really wanted to win.
Okay.
And somebody told me, well, if you go to get this thing called philosophy, it's in the bookstore under the philosophy, and you put some of those quotes in your speeches, you'll win more. So I went and I got a bunch of philosophy books from the bookstore. You know, I got Plato and Aristotle and Kant and John Rawls and John Stuart Mill, and I read them all looking for quotes to put into my speeches. That was my only reason for reading them. That was my first experience of philosophy. I still have some of these books where, especially Kant, you know, I've underlined what you can quote. And I used to quote him for both sides. I would quote the same philosopher for and against. Uh, so, but I was really impressed by Kant, of all these people. I thought, wow, this is amazing. This guy just found all the answers. It's finished. Philosophy is finished because he got all the answers. And that was my first experience of philosophy. I didn't think I was going to pursue it because I actually thought it was finished and he got all the answers. But I thought, you know, I would read him and think more about him. I didn't think it was an open field. I thought it was just this one guy who got all the answers correct. And then it was really when I went to college that I started to see, oh, wait, there were all these questions and there were all these different ways of pursuing them. And then there was this guy, Socrates. I had read The Republic. I had read some Plato, but it didn't make as big an impression on me as later when I read earlier Socratic dialogues. Even then, even in college, I didn't think I would become a philosopher. I didn't major in philosophy, and I didn't go to graduate school in philosophy. I went to graduate school in classics, so Greek and Latin, what you call philology here, I think. Greek and Latin. I was always good at languages because I learned many from a young age, right? And so I went to graduate school in classics, studying Greek and Latin, really focusing on Latin poetry. And I love to read, you know, Herodotus and Horace and all this. I love to do this sort of reading and analyzing and translation, but I didn't love to do the writing, the essays, like where you interpret it. And so I did a lot of exams. I took, you know, history exam, prose composition, etc., Latin literature, Greek literature, poetry. And then when I finished all the exams, they said, okay, it's time to write a dissertation. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I think I'll start over. And so then I started over and started in philosophy. And that's when I started to study philosophy. So it was a long time after undergraduate that I really officially began to study philosophy.
Oh, what a journey! So thank you for sharing that, right? Because that's difficult to guess without knowing, you know. So yeah, very, very nice that you could share it with us, and maybe it's inspirational also for some people to get into philosophy little by little, not since you were a kid, no? And then maybe why did you go more into Aristotle? Why, I don't know if it's like your favorite philosopher, or maybe you have, before you were talking about Kant. I mean, are you putting now a lot of focus on Socrates, or you are studying the whole, lots of other philosophers? I mean, what is your approach to philosophy?
So I have a special love of Socrates,
Okay.
that I, developed. Even though I was not a philosophy major as an undergraduate, I took some classes in which we read the Socratic dialogues, and I became kind of obsessed. So that's why I learned Greek, and then I studied Greek history, and then I, read commentaries on the dialogues, and then I would write papers on the Socratic dialogues and try and like discover the hidden meaning. And but I found this process, even though I kept developing in the scholarly direction, somewhat unsatisfying. And that's sort of how I realized, like, well, I don't exactly want to study Socrates. I want to be Socrates. And I tell the story in my book that when I was a senior in college, I became frustrated with how I wasn't getting closer and closer to being Socrates, even though I was putting all this work into studying. And I went to the place that I thought was the closest to the analog to the agora in ancient Athens, which is the steps in front of the Art Institute. I was at the University of Chicago, so this is in Chicago. The Art Institute, the museum, has these big steps with lions in front. So I went there, and I'm like, okay, this is our public square. This is where people hang out. And I walked up to people, and I said, "Do you want to have a philosophical conversation?" Because my idea was I was going to be Socrates, and I was going to walk up to people and do this thing. I wanted to do his thing. And people said yes, which kind of surprised me. I thought they were going to say no. They said yes. And then I was like, okay, what is art? And I thought what's going to happen is what happens in the dialogues, which is the person says, "Oh, that's easy. Here's an answer." And then Socrates says, "Well, no, that doesn't work for this reason." And they say, "Oh, fine. Here's another answer." And Socrates says, "No, that doesn't work for this reason." And they keep going. And slowly, as Socrates refutes the answers and they get refined, they proceed and they have this inquiry into like the nature of art. So that's what I thought was going to happen, but it's not what happened. What happened was that people were suspicious of me. They were kind of afraid of me. They seemed to want to get out of the conversation, but they didn't know how to do it, and they didn't want to be rude. And they were like, what is she? They were incomprehending. Like, what is she doing? Is she trying to sell us something? We don't know. And it became clear that, like, I don't know how to do this. Like, the thing he was doing, it looks easy. It looks like all you have to do is ask people questions. And it turns out it's actually, I was like, there's some secret thing that he's doing to get people to respond in this way. And it took me a long time to realize all I would have had to do is read the dialogues more carefully. He doesn't walk up to strangers and ask them questions. He gets introduced and he finds what is the question that person has a special investment in. So he finds the question that the other person feels like they're on the hook to answer. And he finds a way to push that question where the person feels like they have to give an answer. And I think it's taken me many years to try to move even a little bit closer to that kind of Socratic model. But I definitely, part of why I didn't major in philosophy is like I just kind of didn't think I could do it. And I had reason to think I couldn't do it. That is, I failed at it. So, and so it's sort of taken me a long time to think, okay, maybe I'm able to do it a little bit, and I'll get better at it if I keep trying. But for me, Socrates, the reason I focus on Socrates is that he is a model in that way, that it's not just that I like his views, but he puts forward an image of a life that I want to have.
Very interesting. Would you say that the Socratic dialogue, the way you are describing it, is not about winning arguments, right? Because you're more having a constructive conversation. And I heard you say sometimes that it's more about transforming ourselves or transforming the person that you are speaking with. Would you say that that's your goal when you have that dialogue with someone, to transform that person, to open the eyes maybe of the person you have in front of you? How would you describe that?
Ideally, you're the one who gets transformed, right? So, like, say I transform you. I mean, that's nice for you, but what about me? I think that Socrates thinks it's the person who's refuted, that is, the person who is proven wrong, they are the ones who benefit from the conversation. Because, say I refute you, then I think the same things as I thought before, but you now think something different. You now were corrected and you move closer to the truth. And so, yes, I think that Socrates thinks that who we are most fundamentally is what we believe. So if our beliefs are corrected, we are improved. And this kind of improvement requires the help of other people. But I think transforming the other person is always the second best goal. The best would be to be transformed oneself.
Oneself, yes, yes. And would you say that the final goal, the way you were describing it, is also to get closer to the truth, at least for the person being refuted? It's one step closer to the truth. Is that
Right.
the final goal, to see the truth, to be closer to that?
So I would say it's to get closer to knowledge. So there's a difference. So a belief could be true. For instance, here I will tell you something. The double square comes from the diagonal. If you want to make a square that's twice as big as a given square, you need to use the diagonal. Now you know something, then you have something true. You can say it back, you can parrot it, right? But you might not know why. You might not be able to produce the proof. You don't have knowledge. You just have a true belief. Socrates thought truth is not really what we're after. What we're really after is truth, true claims, true beliefs that have been tied down with a justification and an understanding of the reason why they're true. So that's knowledge. So he thought that our goal in conversation was to get to knowledge. It's not enough if you have the truth. And that's the way in which, if I refute you, I might be benefited a little bit, because I might, for instance, have come to see a new reason why I was right about why I was right? So I got a little, you were benefited more because you did more of a correction, but I at least have maybe a little bit of a better grip on the justification for my own view if I got to come up with it in order to refute you. And so, yes, I think Socrates thinks the truth is just not high enough a bar. It's not good enough to have the truth.
You say, and I've read that you say that philosophy should be a way of life, not just an intellectual exercise. Could you expand a little bit on that? Is that connected to what you were just saying, or there is something more there that should be a way of life?
The way that I put it is that actually those two things are not different. So I'm a Socratic intellectualist. That is, I have an ethical position that I'm setting out in my book that I call Socratic intellectualism, which says that life is an intellectual exercise. That's what life really is. All the other stuff in life is background to our attempts to understand what we're doing. That is, there's a lot of stuff you can get distracted by in life, of taking care of your body and of making sure other people have a good opinion about you. And that's all going to be necessary part of life. But all of that is the background to what really matters, which is trying to understand what you're up to and why we're here and what we're supposed to be doing. So one way that I put that, one way that I sort of defend that, because sometimes people ask me, but like, why do we want knowledge? Why do we care? What's so great about it? Is to imagine I were to offer you could live the rest of your life and it would go just the same as otherwise, except you would not be conscious. You would appear to be conscious. Everyone around you would think you were just the same. You would have the same facial expressions. It would seem as though there were thoughts going on and feelings, but you would be a zombie, okay? Unbeknownst to everyone around you, you're actually a zombie who's just perfectly mimicking the way you would have behaved otherwise. And then I say, okay, so do you want that life, the zombie life, or the regular life? Everyone wants to pick the regular life. Nobody wants the zombie life. Why not? It's just the same. I say, well, no, it's not the same because it's not my life. I'm not really living it if I am not experiencing it. It's not me. It just appears to be like me. So I think Socrates thought a very similar thing is true about knowledge. That is, if you don't understand why you're doing the things you're doing, then you're kind of going through the motions of living, but you don't actually grasp why you're doing anything that you're doing. You're like disconnected from your own life. And so that's why I think life is an intellectual exercise. And so philosophy is a way of life just because life is intellectual.
Yeah. Yes, maybe I would argue about that. I don't know if I should go into that debate, right? Because I want to know more ideas. But for me, let me say that might be true if you have an intellectual capacity, right? Maybe people who don't have as much intellectual capacity, or animals that other animals like the dog or other animals that don't have this intellectual capacity, that's not their goal in life, right? So probably
I
their goal in
agree.
life is
I agree that
huh?
it's not the goal of like a bear or a snail to understand why it's here or what it should do. But I think that this is just a way that we're not happy with the lives of, but we wouldn't happy to live the life of a bear or a snail, and I think this is why. Um, uh, so you know, a plant is perfectly happy not to be conscious, right? A plant lives its whole life in the zombie mode and can be flourishing within zombie mode. But that's not good enough for the bear. The bear wants to experience its life. So the bear is one level up from the snail and from the plant, and we are one level up from the bear. Mere consciousness is not enough for us. We want to understand our own lives. So I think, yeah, that's true. I have intellectual capacity, but so do all human beings have intellectual capacity. And intellectual capacity just is the capacity to try to understand why you're doing what you're doing.
Yes, yes. And some people are more mind focused, and others are more experiencing life and not being so active in terms of thoughts, and they simply enjoy doing what they do. No, so say. For me, it would be more like a call, like an option, right? What is your goal in life? It's for you to choose. Do you want to find the answers to the big questions, or why you are here on Earth? That would be and in my case, I would say yes. That's a very important part of my life. But I know other people who say, David, I don't care about this. I mean, I simply want to live my life, enjoy life, be with my friends, play some soccer, or whatever it is, right? Would you say that these people are not living they cannot be fulfilled? There is something missing in their lives?
So let me tell you a funny empirical fact, which is that I get this question a lot. That is the question, um, what about the person who just has no intellectual interest in engaging in any discussion of this kind? They don't care about being seen as a mind or being a thinker or engaging in intellectual activity or living an intellectual life. But in this example, the person who raises this to me, they're always talking about somebody else. So like you just did, I have a friend, I know other people. Somehow those other people never come to me. They never tell me that I am the one who does not have any intellectual interest. So I find this a little bit suspicious. I have emails from people who read my book who never read any philosophy before in their life. I have a woman wrote me, she's like 90 years old, and it's the first philosophy she ever wrote, and she is fascinated by it. I have a man wrote me like a few weeks ago, who's an alcoholic, and he said, your book really helped me understand why Alcoholics Anonymous meetings are so valuable, because of the way we conduct the conversation. He's not an intellectual in some sense of intellectual, right? And everybody is really sure that there are some non-intellectuals out there, but it's not them. I'm just not sure those people actually exist. Because when I talk to them, they seem to have intellectual interests, and they seem to care whether they're right or wrong about things, and they seem to want to be respected as thinkers. And I've just never met a person. I've met many people who claim there are such people, but I've never met anyone who claims that they themselves are such a person.
Yeah. No, and I
I'm just
think it's a fair I think it's a fair point. And I was referring, I mean, maybe there are two aspects of that. One aspect is, as you're describing it, want to be right about my thoughts and about my ideas, and
yeah.
they want to defend their ideas. And I think everybody wants that. At least that's my experience, no? But then there is the other aspect, that it's asking the big questions in life. What is the meaning of life? Why
Yeah,
are we
almost
here?
nobody does that. I agree.
Yeah.
Almost nobody
Okay.
does it. But I
Yes.
think
Yeah.
everyone secretly wants to do it.
Yes, exactly. And for some people, it's more about, no, when it's late at night, when I drink, after drinking a little bit, having a cigar in a relaxed atmosphere, then it's when I ask myself or my colleagues that question. Oh, what are we doing here? No? But they don't have that thought or that questioning in the day to day, right?
Yeah, I think it's just very rare to have it in the day to day. I think almost nobody does. Even I don't, except when I have to focus on it. I have to force it to make it happen, and it's hard. Um, but but I guess, like, to me, the question, do we do we have some existential banter in the evening over drinks or not is a relatively superficial difference between people. There's a deep similarity in caring about whether you're right, in wanting to defend your views when challenged, and in having the potential to be corrected. And that's to say, maybe part of the reason why this illusion, I think it's an illusion, arises, that there are this set of people, it's always not me or not us, the set of people who are not intellectual, is that we intellectuals are overestimating how intellectual we are. That is, we are pretty far from the Socratic ideal. It's not like we're doing it and they're not. None of us are doing it. We are doing a bunch of things that point to the fact that we would live a lot better if we were doing it. But we're not really far from those other people who we're imagining are perfectly happy not to live thoughtless lives.
Yeah, maybe starting to connect with some of the things that you describe in your book, Open Socrates. You revisit the Tolstoy existential crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
In which he asks himself, what is the meaning of life? What am I doing here? I mean, if I'm going to die at the end, how does all this make sense, right?
Right.
What is the main message or the reason why you revisit the Tolstoy's existential crisis? What is the main message maybe that you want to share, or how do you want to make the reader reflect on that?
So what I want to show them is that there are two very different ways that a person could confront fundamental questions about their lives. One is Tolstoy's way. That is, he's going along in his life up until the age of 50. He's not really thinking about these questions. And then at one point he decides to turn his attention to them. And as soon as he does, he concludes immediately that they're the most fundamental, most important questions. If you can't answer them, your life is not worth living. And there's no possible answer. I'll never make any progress. It's completely hopeless. So I should just commit suicide. So he concludes those things really quickly almost in one moment of thought. So the message of Tolstoy's confession is sort of like, keep the lid on Pandora's box. Just don't try. Don't open the possibility of asking these questions, because you will soon realize how hopeless it is, and then you'll be stuck because you'll be haunted by them. And Tolstoy, he's very similar to the kind of question you asked me. He thought, I wish I was one of those peasants, one of those thoughtless people who are fine to live their lives without thinking, and just, unlike intellectuals like me, they're really the lucky ones. Okay. So he thought better to be like them and never ask questions. Socrates faced in some way the same predicament. He thought, wow, there are these really difficult questions, and without answers to these questions, nothing that we do really matters. Except he thought, I'm going to go all in on these questions. I'm going to spend my whole life inquiring into them. And he thought he could make progress. He thought that it was a thing you could do. You actually could inquire into them. You could ask it and you could get an answer. Then you can ask another question. And slowly you would come to a clearer view of the matter at hand. And he thought it was the greatest joy of life to be able to pursue these inquiries. So I wanted to contrast Tolstoy because I wanted to explain what I think makes the difference between this completely pessimistic, despairing approach and the Socratic approach. And I think what makes the difference is whether or not you try to do it by yourself. I think Tolstoy tried to do this by himself. And a lot of people do this. They try to ask themselves fundamental questions, sit in a room by yourself and kind of ask yourself about existence, and maybe you scribble things in a notebook. And I get a lot of people telling me, my friend tried that and it didn't go well. And I think, it's not going to go well, because if the problem is that you're ignorant, spending a lot of time by yourself with yourself is just an ignorant person guiding the ignorant person, and it's not going to go anywhere. But one thing that can happen if you talk to another person is that they're able to see the flaws in your ideas, the flaws that you precisely can't see, otherwise you would have corrected them. And those flaws are in fact flaws through which you see the world. So they color your whole vision of everything, and your interlocutor can just see them and can point them out to you and can help you make progress. And that's what Socratic inquiry is.
Yeah. And what progress would you say you've made with your inquiries, with your questioning? At the beginning of the conversation, I asked you, what are 3 important things for you in life? The first thing that you said is find the answer or get closer to these fundamental questions. Ask myself about that. What progress have you made? Do you have any maybe insights or reflections that you can share?
So some of it is like I've been convinced by some of the points of Socratic progress.
Okay.
So, like, don't get revenge. Don't ever get revenge. And also, don't get it, but call it something else, like justice or accountability or what the person deserved.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think that's a really important insight. Like if you're treated badly, you're not allowed to treat the other person badly as a response to that. Um, we have a very, very deep impulse to do that. It feels right. It feels justified. We teach it to our children. The way you can see it, if you have two children and if they're fighting and each one says, well, he started it, then that means you taught them that it's okay to do bad things if the other person did a bad thing first. Otherwise, they wouldn't say he started it, right? So this is a very deep mistake that we make. And I think even there, like, I'm not at the end, even with respect to that one, but I would say that's a big progress for me to come to understand that you're never allowed to do anything bad to anyone, irrespective of what they did first.
Yeah. And that's an important one. That's an important one. And in your book also to maybe to touch on more things, right, that you describe in your book, you also talk about the paradox, the gadfly and the midwife paradox. And you bring here the tension between critique and construction in a conversation. Maybe can you share a little bit about that and what is this tension and why is that useful, right? And why is it even necessary, I would say, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, the paradox, as I introduced it, is really, it's a paradox about the Socratic dialogues. That is, Socrates, in so many of the dialogues, is presented as a gadfly who stings you, and then someone says, "My mouth becomes numb, so I can't speak." He takes the words out of your mouth. He makes you feel incompetent. He takes away your wisdom. He makes you feel like you're at a loss, like you don't know what to say. He is somebody who it's like he punctures the balloon of arrogance, right? And so the person is left feeling bereft and empty and with nothing, as though all their cognitive possessions have been taken away. Okay, so that's one. Let's call that Socrates the gadfly. But Socrates, in the Theaetetus, describes himself as a midwife. That what he does is he meets someone and he helps them deliver an idea baby. Like he is bringing insights into existence. And that what he does is he talks with people in order to inquire, in order to make progress, and to arrive at knowledge. So that's the positive Socrates the midwife. And the paradox is, like, how could he be both of these people? How could he be the deflationary gadfly and the creative, productive, helpful, nice midwife? And what I argue is that Socrates, the gadfly and the midwife, really reflects the attempt to solve a problem about how we pursue knowledge. That we have to, in order to pursue knowledge, we have to have truths and we have to avoid falsehoods. And these two rules pull us in two different directions. Because if I just really want to avoid falsehood, I could just suspend judgment about everything and be skeptical. And if I'm clear that I want to have as many truths as possible, I should just believe as much things as possible, and then some of them will be right and I'll have some truths. Be dogmatic. And the problem is we can't be dogmatic and skeptical at the same time. We can't have truths and avoid falsehood at the same time. And so the Socratic method is designed to solve this problem by giving those two roles to two different people. There is Socrates, who's trying to avoid falsehood. He is always trying to say, wait a minute, I'm not sure you're right. Let me ask another question. Let me examine what you have to say. And then there's the interlocutor who always needs to answer. What is virtue? Oh, that didn't work. Okay, try again. What is virtue? Try again. What is virtue? And if they don't know, they got to guess. They got to say something because they have to have a truth. And the difference between Socrates the gadfly and Socrates the midwife is just the difference between Socrates considered in his role as the refuter, then he's the gadfly, and Socrates as part of the conversation where the two people are working together and they're coming towards the truth, and that's the midwife. And so the thought is that what Socrates discovered is that actually by refuting people, you can be inquiring and making progress towards the truth, that refuting is productive for this reason.
Yeah. And if we translate that to our day to day, to our lives today, how can we use that? It's more like having conversations with people who have a different perspective, a different view, or it's positioning ourselves with one of these two roles and asking somebody else to take a different role. I don't know. How can we use that method, that approach in our day to day?
It's actually kind of the second thing you just said. That is, you have to find someone who's either willing to ask you questions or willing to answer your questions. One of those two things. My own experience, it's much easier to find people who are willing to answer your questions. People are not very willing to ask questions, except for journalists. Okay, you're like the counterexample to this general tendency. People like to tell stories. They like to talk about themselves. They like to say their opinions. They do not like to ask questions. So if you're willing to ask the questions, then you just have to find, and that's what Socrates found, is that he had to be the one who asked the questions, because people are much more preferred to give answers, because people feel like they know lots of things and they're ready to spout answers. And so you have to find the people who will answer your questions and the people who will put up with it when you challenge them and when you ask them for a better answer. But you also have to find the right questions, that is, questions where you and that person share an interest in finding the answer. So like I told the story of when I went to the Art Institute and I asked people questions and it did not work because I didn't have a sense of what those people cared about, so that I could kind of make them feel like they're on the hook for answering that question. So you have to find the right questions too. And you have to kind of give people the right incentives, like reward them for being open to question and being open to challenge. And if they challenge you, be very cheerful about it, so that it's clear what game you're playing.
Excellent. Also, maybe as part of this this game, I see it a little bit as a game sometimes, no? Because and you have to play that in order to grow and to learn new things, no? But part of it also, as you describe it in the book, is that there is a discomfort of not knowing. And this is a central part of philosophy, right? You have to learn. I don't know about this, no, and I'm being challenged, and I need to maybe come up with new ideas or new way to defend my ideas, no. What is the role you feel this discomfort plays in philosophy, and how can we be resilient to it? Because that's for some people, maybe they get tired very quickly. Oh, I don't want to, right? I don't want to be confronted all the time. Let me alone. Let me be.
I think it's just practice.
Yeah.
That's all it is. There's no special magical person who doesn't feel this discomfort. You just do it more times and you get used to it. You know, the first time you give a talk as a philosopher, you give a talk and people in the audience raise their hand and they're like, here's why I think you're wrong. You're like, it's shocking. It's upsetting. It's like, but I think I'm right. And, you're trying to show me up. And as you practice it, you start to realize those people are helping you. They're trying to help you. It's like you start to feel at home in it. But I don't think that there's anything you can do by yourself, in your head. There's not a lever you can turn and say, just be more humble, just be more accepting. It's actually just doing it more times. And when you first start to do it, you do it badly. You will fail at it. You just do it more and you get better at it. But it's really much more of a matter of practice than anything else.
So practice, like with many other skills in life, right? Intentional practice, and you will improve, you will learn, and you will feel more comfortable doing it. No? And maybe also touching on a different aspect that you describe in the book, right? One of the chapters that it's about love. And you argue that true love, Aristotle argued that true love is about aspiring to the good, right, with your partner, rather than simply accepting the other person as they are. How would you say that this is different to the love that we are accustomed today, or that we try to find today? So how are these today compared to what Aristotle defends is different, and what can we learn from that?
I think it's not different. It's the same
It's
thing.
not different. Okay.
We're just
Okay.
doing it badly. So I think
Okay.
Socrates is showing us what we really want. And it was different. What he was saying was different also from his time. It's not as though he wasn't being countercultural in relation to love as it existed in his time. He was just as countercultural as he's being in relation to love as it exists in our time. But what he's saying is, look, I know there's some things you think you want out of love. Maybe you think you want sex, or you think you want companionship. You think you want someone who will help you out when you're sick. You think you want someone to help you raise children. And he's like, I'm not going to disagree that you want all those things, but all of those things are, it's like they are the periphery of something, and there's something in the center. And what is in the center, what is the essence of love, is going to have to be whatever it is that is the biggest gift that human beings can give to each other. What is something that you can only get from another person? It's not going to be care for your body, or it's not going to be food. His thought is the biggest gift that people can give each other is an intellectual gift. It's helping them think better. That's how we can really be together or be close to someone. So I don't think he was trying to depict a different kind of love. I think what he was doing was offering critique of the conception of love that we have.
So seeing it this way, what is then something, because you say we are doing it badly, right? So
Yes.
what is one thing, maybe one practical thing, one piece of advice or that you could share with the readers or with the listeners of the podcast that they can do? One little thing, no? Say, to go into that direction.
So I think there isn't a little thing. There's only one big thing, and it's already the thing we described, which is to try to have actual conversations with people. But I'm going to give you a different thing, okay, which is just, here is something which is like a sign. It's like an indication that Socrates is right, that there's something messed up about how we do love, which is that if you have a friend and they go to a restaurant and they're banging on the door of the restaurant and they're saying, let me in. And you say to your friend, no, this restaurant is closed today. And they say, I have to get into the restaurant. And you say, but look, there are all these other restaurants on the street. You could go to the other ones. They're open. And they say, no, I can only go to this one. And you say, was the food so good in this restaurant? And they say, no, I hate the food. You would say, you're messed up. There's something wrong with you. Like you need maybe some kind of mental health assistance because your mind is thinking about the situation in a way which is broken. Okay, that will be clear to us. But if I slightly change the example, and now it's your friend, and she's texting her ex, and the breakup was a disaster, and he was terrible to her, and it was a toxic relationship, and the last thing she does is want him, but she just wants to text him because she wants closure, or she wants to show him, and this is the fourth time now that they might be getting back together, and you say, oh yeah, that's how it works with love. That's how it works with romance. Of course, we text our horrible exes that we had toxic relationships with, even though there's all these other guys out there that she could be going for. We've normalized that. We've normalized insanity, right? The word in Greek, Socrates says love is a form of mania, which is, in English, we say mania. It's the same word, insanity. And so what Socrates wants to say is like the status quo is not okay. And it would be obvious to us if it was not okay if somebody did it about food, and we're just doing it in another area. But clearly what we want out of this situation is something else, something we haven't understood. And I'm giving you an account of something that would make sense of this kind of crazy behavior and would kind of straighten your behavior and put it into line. But if you want to know what it is you have to do to get it, it's just the only one thing Socrates has ever said, which is to try to let your mind depend on the mind of another person in this distinctive way, in this Socratic way, where you either ask the questions or you answer them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's see if we can learn something in that regard about love and maybe have better relationships, right? Because I look around me and I see lots of relationships that are not going very well. So there is things to learn from Socrates in that regard.
Yeah, maybe a quick thing to say there is like, here's something I never heard anyone say. These people, this couple, they have a bad relationship, but they can really talk to each other and they really understand each other. Those don't go together, right? So that's Socrates' theory right there. To have a good relationship and to be able to talk to one another is the same thing.
Yes. and I see many couples that don't communicate openly. They have secrets. They don't dare to talk about certain things, right? So being able to speak openly about, well, with your couple, with your husband, wife, partner, that's definitely a very important thing to do. And not everybody is doing it, right? So yeah, hopefully we will learn something and do it better. And now to start a little bit closing the conversation, right? Also looking at the time, there is one last question, well, or a couple more questions, no? But again, going to the end of the conversation, and there is maybe this is a bigger one, a bigger question, because you also talk about how to bring Socratic dialogue maybe into public spaces, politics, education, social media. What are some thoughts from you on that regard? What opportunity do you think we have to maybe, as I said, bring these Socratic dialogues into public spaces?
So I think it's pretty hard. That is, Socrates didn't do it, and he explains why. He explains why he didn't try to have philosophy conversations, you know, in the political assembly, where people would be gathering together to say, okay, should we attack Sparta, or should we build up our navy, or whatever. He did not try to have philosophy conversations there, and he says, because if I did that, they would have killed me even before they killed me. And I think that there's something funny about philosophical conversation. It doesn't scale very well. That is, it really is one-on-one, and it's hard to make it like a group conversation. There I have a weaker view than the view Socrates had. Socrates thought it was impossible. And I'm not so sure. We have way more communicative technology than Socrates had. And so I think it might be like a little bit possible, but it's very hard. Social media is very hard because people people just don't communicate very well on social media. They don't understand each other well, and they don't realize how much in communication we rely on signals of understanding that are like facial expressions and timing, and communication isn't just about what words you say. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff involved, and I think it just goes pretty badly on social media a lot of the time. And so I'm not sure how we make that better. But I think in politics more generally, the answer is just, what I argue in the politics chapter. Let's say I'll pick one thing, which is Socrates thought that you can't fight injustice. It's impossible to fight injustice. A lot of people think they're fighting injustice. They're devoting their life to the cause of fighting injustice. They should stop, because you can't do it. You can't fight it. What injustice is ignorance. It's people not understanding how things are. And the only response to that would be to learn. And so it would be a kind of reorientation of our political landscape around the thought that we are here to help each other learn things. And if things are going badly, that's because we have bad ideas. Probably all of us, because if some of us had perfectly justified ideas, we just teach them to the rest of us. Right? So if I have a really good account of why the double square comes from the diagonal, I can teach it to you. If I can't teach my political ideas to you, it's probably because I don't know them. So even if they're true, I might not know them. I might not have an explanation or justification. And so I think that the movement away from political battles and toward political inquiry, that would be what Socrates would prescribe for politics.
Mm-hmm. Last question, Agnes, last question. What is one final idea that you want to share? Maybe that we touched on, or maybe that we did not touch on, and then there is the opportunity now to bring it, right? What is one final idea that you would like to share with the listeners? And maybe with a practical approach also, right? Something that they can do differently moving forward after maybe reading. Of course, one thing that they have to do for sure is read your book, right? But what is one advice that you would give them, or reflection that you would share with them?
I think it's really interesting that people, like, when they hear a conversation like this, like the one that we're having, they're kind of hungry for advice. They're like, tell us what to do, right? Yeah. And so I have an essay I wrote called Against Advice, in which I say, it's if I don't think that I myself have knowledge about how I should live, then I'm certainly not going to have knowledge about how a bunch of strangers that are listening to me on a podcast should live. Like, I simply don't know how they should live, right? And so maybe the thing to reflect on is to think about that hunger that you feel inside of you, or like, but why doesn't she tell us? Why doesn't she get at least a little hint, at least a suggestion? What could I do a little bit differently? That means there are things you want to know. That's a sign. There's things you want to know, and you can find them. If you want to know them, you can find them. But unfortunately, I can't tell them to you because I don't know them. And so maybe it's just to recognize that we are all much more inquisitive than we give ourselves credit for.
Very nice. So maybe my final also thought to close is that, I've learned from this conversation, or you made me reflect, that it's not that much about the answers to the question. It's more about asking questions, asking maybe the right questions, and being persistent and asking them over and over until we had this knowledge that you were describing at the very beginning, that probably it's the end goal of what Socrates was trying to teach us. It's been, Agnes, react to this, please, react to this, yes.
Answers come cheap. We all have answers all the time. Okay. So yeah, in that sense, it's not about answers, but it isn't just about questions. It's about knowledge. It's about having the right answers with a justification, with an explanation, understanding why. So the way to think about it is answers that are the product of inquiry.
Answers which are the product of inquiry.
So instead of just reflexive answers that came from nowhere, answers where you can trace out why you think it because you got there by way of a line of thought.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's a good way to close our conversation with this final thought, which hopefully will be inspiring and encouraging for our listeners. It's been a great pleasure, Agnes. Thank you very much